Hello, English 2. I'm here in the sand today at the top of week 3 to talk to you about symbols and the Western Sahara. You're already familiar with symbols, I'm sure. The flag is an example I gave in my glossary of terms. Check out the newly posted Critical Thinking gallery for that. But a flag is clearly not a piece of cloth and stands for a nation. But what about this piece of cloth that I just took off my face? What does it stand for? Is it a symbol? Is it a symbol of a global pandemic? And if so, is it a symbol the world over or just here in the US? In the US, I've heard the mask called a symbol of our oppression from an advancing socialist regime and agenda. I've also heard it referred by others as a symbol of solidarity, for civic duty, for respecting the social contract. And now for us in Central California, it's also perhaps some flimsy protection against the air pollution from our fires. But there's a greater cloth symbol we're going to be looking at this week, and that is the symbol of the tent. In the tent city that has sustained them for almost 50 years in the desert, the Sahrawi people of the Western Sahara prize their tents like their family. In that, we see a personification similar to the Palestinians and the personification of their olive trees. I'd like to read to you from the text on page 26. In Hassaniya, the Sahrawi language, the word for tent is the same word as family. Abdullahi, a friend of Malayanin, pointed to the tent where he was born. You know, when I traveled from here, I miss the tent, he said. The tent makes me feel my roots, my nation. I was born in a tent, grew up in a tent. You know, it means a lot to me. Yeah. So do you notice how the tent connects the generations? Again, like the olive trees, it creates that sense of legacy. The tents connect the people to their ancestors. Savoring the Sahrawi hospitality, Dichincio says he too started to associate tent with family. But he adds, I knew, though, that their generosity was born of tradition rather than abundance. On page 28, he talks about this. He says, for the Sahrawis, hosting visitors is an indigenous ritual. In the harsh desert, after all, an offered meal or glass of tea can mean the difference between living and dying. He goes on to talk about the symbol of tea. And so here, as I brought my own tea with me, I'll talk about the Sahrawi ritual of tea as I sip some of my own. He says, in the Sahrawi tradition, tea is a trinity. The tea ceremony embraces 3 holy essentials, each beginning with the Arabic letter Jim. Jama is the gathering. To drink tea alone is to waste it. Jajar means slowness. Proper tea cannot be brewed in haste. Jamar is the charcoal. Tea demands burning and boiling. And with that said, I wondered what the tea actually symbolizes. Perhaps patience to go through with so many steps just to brew and drink a simple glass of tea. And patience comes across as a theme, as Marcello talks about being impatient, but learning that if the Sahrawi can wait 40 years, then he can wait a few days to visit the wall. And so perhaps to cultivate patience for tea helps one accept the patience one must cultivate to wait for colonialism's end. All they can do is wait. Drawing a line in the sand shows us a sweet and uneventful daily life of the indigenous people. But this chapter is one of contrasts as well, as we read about a violent colonial history, the brutal Polisario soldiers, and the Sahrawi symbol of defiance, the camel. Camels being the only mobility they have. To draw a line in the sand, though literal in this case, is also a euphemism. And that too is deceptive because the line we learn about is the most brutal wall de Cintio sees on his travels. It is called the Wall of Shame, but it is barely 2 meters high and built of sand. Buried beneath it are landmines, lined up in a row that stretches for miles. The longest stretch of landmines in the world. This wall kills, or worse, it maims. It maims those who would cross it, that is. And as Marcello says of it, I'll read on page 40 his ominous observation at the time, or after the fact, I should say. This wall might not inspire awe, but it does its job. Though I didn't know it at the time, this berm was the most effective barrier I would see on my travels, and the only wall that did what it claimed to do. Okay, this week you'll read through the chapter, check out my supporting materials, and start to put together your first paper, which is on occupation. You'll note that I've reorganized my modules into weeks rather than units, and I add a how to use this page suggestion on the top of each page for many of them. I hope that's useful. I understand that some of my pages were overwhelming as I got overzealous the first couple of weeks, so I will try to organize them in a way that's more user-friendly. So hope that helps. You will have a Unit 1 quiz this week covering the first 2 chapters we've used. We've read, used. There will be a week 3 discussion, like the first 2, and you'll start your paper where you'll reflect on the conflict at either the West Bank Wall or the Western Sahara, or you can start to combine, compare and contrast the two. You'll have several options to choose from, which I'll present to you, so look for those. You'll be able to talk about the importance of symbols and tradition to pathos for a people. You'll be able to talk about the role of authority and history and appeals based on these. And once again, I'm not imposing a deadline for this first paper, so work on it at your own pace, and I will see you back on Canvas.